What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We're watching the tropics. Right here we have Ernesto approaching Newfoundland at this current point. Re-strengthened up to a higher-end Category 1 hurricane. Been paying very close attention to that as it starts to make its final approach. Also watching the deep tropics for some potential activity happening in the next couple of weeks as hurricane season is about to ramp up big time. As it is now August 19th, August 20th is when the climatological surge begins. It moves all the way until the 10th of September, and then as we continue through the season, there is going to be continuing to be high activity throughout the whole month. So that's a bunch of stuff we're going to have to continue to pay attention to at this current point. Been watching some computer models, watching some stuff going up along the ensembles, everything like that. We're just going to have to pay attention to that. I want to go ahead and see what the dry air is looking like. Right here, with everything that's going on, we can go ahead and show you the true color right here with red, blue, and green right here. What we're noticing right here is we're seeing a lot more moisture starting to surge across much of the main development region. I've been kind of telling you and kind of alluding to you guys that this has been going on. We're going to have to pay attention to it. We're seeing a huge moisture surge to the west in the main development region. It's finally starting to spread across, and in the next 48 hours, it is going to be encompassing pretty much the vast majority of the MDR, and that's just some stuff we're going to have to pay attention to. Also, the Caribbean Sea is priming up for hurricane season. Same with the Gulf of Mexico with all the moisture that's continuing to fire up. I know there's a front moving through the Gulf of Mexico right now that's increasing the shear. However, at this current point, it's not going to really affect anything in the short term, whereas in the long term, absolutely things are going to start ramping up, and we're continuing to see tropical wave after tropical wave come off the coast of Africa, getting a shot to develop in less dry air and less wind shear as they both continue to trend down, and we're going to have to keep very close tabs on that. Let's go ahead and show you some other stuff right here. We're going to go ahead and I first want to go ahead and show you the sea surface temperatures that we're paying attention to, first in the Western Atlantic and then in the rest of it. So here's the Midwestern Atlantic right here. The Gulf of Mexico is boiling. We're seeing a lot of areas of 31 plus degrees Celsius waters going on pretty much across much of the Gulf right here, including parts of the Loop Current as well, which is pretty interesting. And then 32 degrees Celsius is across the entire coast of Louisiana, getting all the way close to Galveston, actually, which is pretty concerning to take a look at in that area, not just because of marine life and everything like that, but because that could definitely help fuel hurricane activity once things start to ramp up. We're also seeing a 32 plus degree Celsius contour around Cuba as well. That's been something we've been watching over the last few days. Quite interesting stuff firing off on all cylinders, and we're also noticing as well, thanks to Ernesto, we're seeing a bit of a cold wake around Bermuda and that area right there, so the waters in that region have cooled off quite a bit because of its slower movement, so that is some relatively good news in the short term, but in the long term, we're going to see those water temperatures recover in that part of the Atlantic, I would argue, in the next couple of weeks, and that's just something we're going to have to pay attention to. So that's what we're paying attention to with the water temperatures. I want to go ahead and show you the climate reanalyzer as well, just to kind of see show you the temperatures. We have seen a bit of a decline in the temperatures thanks to Hurricane Ernesto and allowing for temperatures to cool off a little bit on its approach to Bermuda, so that has been some relatively good news, but the season is far from over. It hasn't even really begun, to be honest with you, in many regards, so we're just going to have to keep very close tabs on that, because if we show you the SST anomaly maps, yes, this part of the Atlantic may be cooler than average thanks to Ernesto, but now we're seeing pretty much the entire majority of the main development region, as well as the Caribbean Sea, and especially the Gulf of Mexico, being much warmer than average. And that's just ultimately stuff we're going to have to pay attention to, especially considering the fact that we're seeing the Bermuda high starting to re-strengthen, starting to reorganize, and that will allow for systems to drive closer to land, and that's just something we are going to have to pay attention to. So that's what we're seeing with the climate reanalyzer. Let's go ahead and show you the ocean heat content as well. OHC continues to surge across a lot of these areas in the main development region and in the Caribbean Sea. A bunch of areas of 175 plus OHC, some areas of 200 plus OHC are popping up on other metrics that I am paying attention to. The eddy is still very much there in the western Gulf of Mexico. It's been spreading out a lot more, as well as just stuff with 175 OHC in much of the loop current, and that's just stuff we're going to have to pay attention to in that regard. So Here's what's been that's what's been ultimately going on with the OHC and parts of the MDR. The eastern part of the MDR doesn't really have much OHC going off it right there. So ultimately, that's not where I'm concerned about for development. But where I am concerned for is pretty much everywhere from about 40 degrees west all the way to the continental United States. That's ultimately what I'm paying attention to, and that's ultimately what I'm continuing to be very concerned about in that regard in terms to the ocean heat content. Let me go ahead and zoom in on this a little bit just to show you that. So ultimately, yeah, and another thing we're noticing is there is a bit of, once again, a cold wake. There's not much OHC near Bermuda thanks to Hurricane Ernesto, but Ernesto has been feeding off all this OHC at around 40 degrees north, pretty much the same latitude as New York City. So it's been kind of feeding off that and actually re-strengthened to a Category 1 hurricane with winds of 90 miles per hour. So that's what we're paying attention to. Pressure of 968 millibars. Maximum sustained winds are near 90 miles per hour. It is expected to weaken. Hurricane force winds only extend outward 35 miles from the center, while tropical storm force winds extend outward 220 miles from the center. I want to go ahead and show the cone very briefly because I know this is going to be making a very close pass to Newfoundland. I would not be surprised if tropical storm watches go into effect shortly. If that's the case, hell, maybe even tropical storm warnings. If that's the case, those winds continue to push further inland. And looking at satellite imagery, we are seeing the outer bands at least offshore of Newfoundland, and I think the eastern part of the island is going to get clipped by this, but ultimately nothing more than like tropical storm force winds around 50 miles per hour or so ultimately is what I'm thinking about. So that's just something we're going to have to pay attention to. So that's what we're looking at with the waters. Let's go ahead and show you the wind shear patterns that we've been noticing over the last few days. Wind shear has been very, very interesting, to say the very least. Once again, there is a front that's moving through parts of the Gulf of Mexico. It's going to be kind of a little wacky over there in terms of shear for the next 48 hours. But look at what the Caribbean is doing. Yeah, you are seeing a couple pockets of wind shear here and there, but ultimately, what you're seeing with these patterns is pretty much what you would see for an August pattern, where you're seeing a lot less wind shear. You're seeing generally pockets of wind shear going on in parts of the Atlantic Ocean right there. This is kind of what you would typically see. And generally what you would start noticing with that is systems taking advantage of the wind shear and at least getting them to tropical storm strength. It just needs a bit of a forcing mechanism in order to get that done, as well as less wind shear in much of the main development region. So that's just stuff you're going to have to pay attention to when you look at that. Let's go ahead and show you some ensemble runs right here. Here is the European. Things are continuing to go really crazy across the European ensembles and the GFS ensembles as well. That's the 12Z GFS. Here's the 0Z. We're seeing more and more of these ensembles. We'll start with 0Z just to give you a general idea of what we're potentially looking at right here, but let's go ahead and zoom in on this and just kind of take a look at some of this stuff. We're seeing more and more of these ensembles starting to fire up. I'm curious to see when this will essentially start. It looks like there's going to be some sort of tropical development starting in the next 5 days or so, at least in the main development region. That's when the tropical wave will come off in the next few days, and then start to set its sights on much of the much of the Lesser Antilles. We're seeing several areas of ensembles, one area of which heading towards the Windward Islands, one of which heading towards the Leeward Islands, and Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. We're seeing one ensemble run having this getting up to hurricane strength, which is very interesting. And ultimately, that's kind of what the Climate Prediction Center has been anticipating in that regard. So that's just some stuff we're paying attention to. Let's go ahead and show you the 12Z run as well. Ultimately, not as much strength in terms of the ensembles in the main development region, but we are seeing more ensemble runs starting to organize more or less in the Gulf of Mexico, as well as a potential storm might be heading over there. And that's just stuff you're going to have to pay attention to as these ensembles are continuing to show a lot of stuff. I forgot to move this over. I do apologize for that. I'll go ahead and zoom in on this as well, just so that way you have an idea of this. And I'll go ahead and show you the 0Z runs as well, just to give you a general viewing point from this. Let's go ahead and zoom in on this right here, and we can go ahead and compare this to the 12Z very quickly. I do apologize for that. So yeah, that's what we're taking a look at. We are seeing weaker ensemble runs, but we're also seeing more ensemble runs in that regards in parts of the Gulf of Mexico and parts of the Caribbean Sea. Just some stuff you need to keep tabs on. And that's just the European right here. Let's go ahead and show you the GFS ensembles. The GFS is going crazy, ladies and gentlemen. The 12Z GFS has been going insane right here, especially in the main development region. I'm curious to see when this whole thing starts. Let's go to 120 hours out. It looks like some stuff is going to be going on in this area of the Atlantic right here, as well as potential formation of the Central American gyre I'm noticing with these parts right here in the GFS, although that could end up drifting into the eastern Pacific Ocean as well. So that's just something you're going to have to pay attention to. But ultimately, it looks like the wave is going to be coming off in the next 2 or 3 days or so. And look at the strength of the high right here. Look at the high pressure system. Definitely strong enough to really drive the system towards the Antilles and potentially towards the continental United States as time continues to go on. And that's just the stuff you pay attention to as a forecaster and stuff you have to pay attention to as a meteorology student, just kind of for long-term concerns in that regard, especially as hurricane season continues to heat up. As Climate Prediction Center has not really slowed down, here's the graph. Once again, for a lot of you nerds out there who want to take a look at this, the graph's been continuing to show very insane values happening. More development happening this week expected across much of the main development region, and similar stuff in September as we start seeing those Cape Verde setups and potentially more systems starting to organize and develop in the Caribbean Sea thanks to the Central American gyre. So that's just ultimately stuff that we're going to have to pay attention to in that regard. So that's what we're kind of looking at with the ensembles, the Climate Prediction Center. Also want to show you the ocean analysis as well, mainly because I'm kind of getting a little curious about this, and I think some of this is pretty interesting right here. I'm going to move this over a little bit just to kind of give you an idea. But here's the ocean analysis as of recent right here, and this is the regions 3 and 4. And this is what I'm using this for, is ultimately kind of what tracking the El Nino and the La Nina. So here's what we're taking a look at. Where we're at right now, we're in a negative neutral phase at this current point in time. If you go ahead and take a look at regions 3 and 4, which is this right here, and regions 1 and 2. Region 1 and 2 is in that La Nina phase right there, although it's been oscillating up and down, up and down, up and down. But region 4 is pretty consistently in the negative neutral phase, which ultimately would give its biggest effects, especially towards the United States and Canada during the winter. And we'll talk about that down the road. I'm not getting into that. But ultimately, what we're noticing with this is just, what this is going to ultimately do. Part of the reason we had 20 named systems last year, but part of the reason that we didn't see very many go and make landfall other than Ophelia and Adalia and those areas is because of the El Nino. What it ultimately did was it weakened the steering currents enough to allow for a lot of these systems to stay out to sea. And that's why you didn't see as much news in terms of the last year's hurricane season in terms of this one. So that's just stuff you're going to have to pay attention to. Regardless of that, however, what we're seeing with this year is we're seeing a negative neutral phase right now for a lot of the regions in the ENSO going on, and ultimately what you're seeing with this is you're seeing an increase of strength with the steering currents. And let's go ahead and show you some model runs right here to indicate this. Let's go ahead and use main sea level pressure anomaly with this right here, and we can use the 12Z run for today. You're seeing that you saw Hurricane Ernesto right here, but you see that Azores high continuing to lurk around and be stronger than average right here. The Bermuda high is expected to rebuild down the road right here, and that's just stuff you're going to have to pay attention to. But look at this right here, ladies and gentlemen. Look at this. We have a high pressure system coming off the East Coast in the next 4 days, and what that'll ultimately do is it'll help with the steering currents with the Bermuda high, and these kind of 3 highs just kind of lurking here will allow for systems to just drive through the Caribbean Sea and drive through the Atlantic Ocean like it's no tomorrow. And that's just stuff you're going to have to pay attention to. And it looks like this high pressure system pretty much persists across a lot of these the East Coast and a lot of the Atlantic Ocean right there. And that's a pattern that we're noticing for the next few days, and it's kind of paired in with all the ensemble runs that are taking a look at this and saying, hey, something's going to develop over here, and that's the main indicator of maybe more of a threat towards land instead of maybe a out to sea type of system, because you have a blocking high over here near the Azores Islands. You have a blocking high that's going to keep this system towards the Lesser Antilles and Greater Antilles, as well as the Caribbean Sea. That's going to stay there for the next week or so after this. And what you're going to notice in that regard is just you have all of that, and that's kind of the ingredients you need, because this is something we did not get in 2023 very much. The ENSO region, because of the El Nino, did not give us this much high pressure to work with, and that's the scary thing. And another thing we're noticing is much lower pressure than average across the tropics. What that generally means is worse weather overall, and that's definitely stuff you're going to have to pay attention to in terms of mesoscale stuff, like maybe some thunderstorms firing up over Jamaica, Cuba, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, or more synoptic scale, like tropical cyclones, hurricanes, tropical storms, kind of all that stuff. So that's just stuff you're going to have to keep very close tabs on. And we showed you the wind, the dry air and all that, and we can go ahead and show you the shear and the moisture forecast to kind of corroborate what I'm paying attention to. Let's use the 200 to 850 millibar wind shear. Right here, it's starting to see signs of some stuff trying to trend down, especially across a lot of these areas in the main development region and Caribbean Sea. You're seeing that shear going on in the MDR, just kind of staying in the southern part of it and ultimately not making too much of a difference, mainly because these tropical waves are coming off of an angle at a latitude high enough to kind of stay out of that shear, and ultimately you're seeing the patterns just continue to get better and better for tropical development down the road. Yeah, they're going to oscillate up and down, but this is more of an August setup that we're paying attention to with the shear. Moisture-wise, let's go ahead and take a look at that. Here's the moisture that we're paying attention to, and then we can show you the anomalies with that as well. Here's the moisture forecast. Yeah, there is still some dry air, and you're going to have a couple more surges going on, but if you take a look at this and you notice this, it's a lot more broken up than it was earlier in the hurricane season. It's a lot more broken up than it was with Beryl. So that's just stuff you're going to have to keep close tabs on. And this, what we're noticing, the trend continuing, the MDR continues to remain very moist and continues to remain just, remain pretty primed for tropical development. It just takes one tropical wave to get this thing going. And lastly, let's show you the anomalies with this, because what we're seeing is, yes, we are seeing less dry air than usual, but the anomalies are pretty concerning right here, especially with this moisture infusion across a lot of these areas going on. And you are still seeing some drier than average, but ultimately, the dry air that's going on is going to be less Sahara dust and more or less just the regular dry air that you notice all around the tropics right here. The Sahara dust, a lot of it's getting pushed up to Europe now, and that's ultimately not becoming an issue anymore. It's not nearly as suppressive as it was in 2022, and in 2023, it's around where we were right now in 2023, actually, if you think about that. But ultimately, that's just stuff you're going to have to keep close tabs on. Let's go ahead and show you some operational models just to kind of see what the next 10-day forecast is going to see, so that way we can give you an idea of what's going on. Keep in mind, just because the operational models may not say anything, the ensembles are definitely saying, hey, something's about to happen, and it usually takes a few days for the operational models to finally catch up once they get an average of what's potentially going on. But here's the European pulled up right here, and ultimately European's not showing too much on the operational, but if we go ahead and show you the ensemble run right here with the 0Z with the 12Z ensemble, just go ahead and show you that right here. We are seeing more and more of these ensemble runs starting to show tropical systems organizing and developing across much of the main development region, and that's just stuff you're going to have to pay attention to. Let's go ahead and show you the GFS run as well. The GFS has been a very interesting model to take a look at this season. Generally a more accurate situation than in years past. With the GFS, not much change with the operational, but we can go ahead and show you the ensembles right here. Ensembles are saying, hey, stuff is really blowing up. You're going to want to pay attention to this down the road. And that's ultimately what we're going to continue to do. Let's go ahead and show you the Canadian model as well. Canadian things are continuing to show a quiet phase for right now, but you are starting to notice a tropical wave or two starting to organize and develop in the main development region as well, and I just figured I'd pay attention to that. NavGen run, it's not really doing that much going on. Let's go ahead and show you the Icon as well. Icon isn't really particularly doing too much either. They are showing some waves organizing and trying to develop, but ultimately they're kind of lagging behind the ensemble run, so we're going to have to pay attention to that in that regards. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. It helps us out, helps us get more people engaged with weather, and if you want to come hang out with us at Storms United, be sure to join the Discord Discord server. The link to it will be in the end screen as well. And shout out to Daniel as an official sponsor of the Pat's Path Predictor channel. He's been really helping me out with a lot of stuff, and I could not have made this video without his support over the last little while. And if you want to also support the channel and become an official sponsor or even a friend of Pat, join the Patreon. The link is the first link in the description down below, and I think you would have a good time over there, just kind of having a little bit of fun with that. So hey, just thought I'd offer. If you don't want to do it, that's fine. I don't mind. But if you want to, go ahead and click that link. I would really appreciate it. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.